Hey everyone. We just wanted to jump out ahead of this episode to discuss our support of the Black Lives Matter movement and denounce the horrific police brutality occurring all over the country. Over the next couple of weeks, the episodes that you're about to listen to were recorded before the death of George Floyd and protesting that took place in response, and we would be remiss to remain silent. This is something we're deeply moved by and wanted to do our part in keeping the focus on what matters.
The heart-rending problem of systemic racism is deeply ingrained in our country, and the struggle for systemic racial equality is fought by so few. Events as horrific as the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, and most recently the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have sparked the passion we are seeing sweep the country. This passion is not new as we recall the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and now present in the Black Lives Matter movement. Here, we want to collectively throw our support towards the peaceful protesters, the organizers, and everyone leading the charge with the Black Lives Matter movement.
We recognize that our podcast is an escape, and thank you for spending your time with us. However, there are far more important voices that deserve your attention too, so we wanted to share those resources and provide a path to those voices, which will be linked in the show notes.
True justice can only be achieved when individuals act justly. It is with this in mind that we share these resources on why systemic racism continues to persist in the fabric of our society and to learn what we can do to help. It's not enough to not be racist. We have to be actively anti-racist and to do our part to squelch the hate. Every little bit we do will create a path towards a future where we all share the most basic fundamental right of equality and safety.
For future listeners, please consider looking through the resources available so this moment goes beyond a single point in history and transforms to the new norms of racial equality. Thank you for your time and enjoy this week's episode of MC You Need to Know. Hello, and welcome back to a new episode of MC You Need to Know, a podcast dedicated to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything you need to know. I'm Trey.
And I'm Jude. God. And I'm Jude.
Are you sure?
I am not sure. I am not.
One of those days?
It is. It is.
Oh, man. You know, usually you open up with asking me how I'm doing. I want to go out and jump ahead. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm doing all right. As we were talking before this started, a new kind of fitness program. Little sore, a little tired, but I'm enjoying it. It's working well.
That's good. That's really good. And finding one that you enjoy is always like a hard find, but once you find it, that momentum gets so much easier to stick with.
Yeah. Well, it's nice. It has these, they send a meal plan and then they send the unpublished YouTube video links for the workout for every day. That's like a 20.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So it's like a 25 to 30 minute workout, depending on what you're doing. Huh. You know, screen share the phone to the TV and do our workout. It's nice.
Man, having those guided workouts is really like a game changer.
Oh yeah.
Because I've been running for almost a year now, but it's been like just free form, like just me going out there and like today I'm gonna do 3 miles or 5 miles. But I found an app that lets me like it has a coach that will chime in on how to keep pace, and it's been the difference maker.
Oh, it's a huge difference maker. You know, because I've thought about doing a podcast for a while, but I knew I needed a partner in crime to help keep me accountable. You know. Yeah,
it's been good because it's been this kind of like push and pull where I think we keep both each other in check, and I've been really happy with the progress so far.
Yeah, me too.
Which I will say, I'm going to pull back the curtains a little bit here. People may know this or they may not know this, just depending on context clues listening into the episodes. But we're a couple of weeks ahead of what people are listening to. And so last week, we just released the episode where the question of the week was like, what are your biggest MCU pet peeves?
Right.
And I mentioned mine was the fact that I don't like when people like retroactively try to connect things that weren't there, such as Peter Parker being in Iron Man 2. And of course, you and I, we already discussed it. We you know, you're a fan of it. I'm not. But what was so funny is now that we're posting these snippets on social media, I posted it on our MCU Need to Know account, and then I retweeted it with my personal account. And the two responses I got, I don't think they actually listened to the clip because they were both in support of the idea that I believe that Peter Parker should be in Iron Man 2. Because I believe one person was like, dude, just let whatever your fan canon be whatever it wants to be, man. Just enjoy things. And I was like, okay, cool.
Well, maybe they're going to listen to this and then go back and change it.
I hope so. At first I was wondering, like, man, should I say this on the podcast? But this will be like a little check to see if they're listening.
Yes. You know who you are out there.
But
and we appreciate you interacting.
Very much. Yes. Thank you. Nice save. But regardless, we if you don't know what we're doing, we have been doing a rewatch of the Marvel Netflix series Daredevil. We've been doing this in lieu of a Black Widow movie that got pushed back to November. And today we are on episode 7 of season 1. And so let's go ahead and jump right into it.
Oh, is it episode 7? I thought it was 6.
I believe it is 7. We can do a quick fact check if we need to. I'm almost positive it's 7.
It is 7. I wrote down 6. Okay.
Well, you know what? Here's another thing. I think we need to figure out definitively. Then this is my own fault because I think technically this is episode 8 of the podcast feed if we count the bonus.
Right.
But that's getting really weird to keep track of. I want to just definitively say this is episode 7. And then the bonus is just the bonus. Yes.
Okay, so we'll just start referring to the pilot or the bonus, and then there you go, episode 7 of the podcast.
Okay, good, because that was making posting stuff on social media so much harder.
Okay, and I was it's starting to make naming files difficult. So,
man, it was it's like we got the time stone and just snapped away with time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's what it's there for.
So we open up with this cold open where this man is running down a stairwell. He's clearly afraid and running for his life. Eventually he gets to this point where he is cornered by a mysterious man who has him, held up with a sword, and he begins interrogating for information about something called the Black Sky. After this man gets what he wants but doesn't seem satisfied, he does kill the man, and the scene ends revealing that it is an elderly blind man who is the attacker.
Yeah, I liked the tension they built here, because at this point it could have been Daredevil, it could have been Wesley. You know, I mean, hey, he's retrieving guns from pinball machines. It could have been Wesley.
Man, if we find out that Wesley is a sword wielder, I don't think this podcast can contain our love for him. He would just be the ultimate badass.
So, but yeah, I mean, at this point, I loved it in the tension building because you didn't know who it was. And I feel like they did a good job. They gave you just enough information of introducing this new character. You didn't see much. He used a sword. We haven't seen sword use yet. You saw a quick close up of the staff, and then you get the reveal of the blind eyes.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this off podcast. I wasn't overly fond of this episode, but I do think that it does a really incredible job of setting everything up, like you said. It kind of harkens back to how economical it's been, in previous episodes. We get introduced to Black Sky, this mysterious man, and we learn about who this man is and his decision making all before we even get to the title sequence.
Right. And this is an episode where they're filling out Matt's backstory, mm-hmm. right? I mean, because we got the backstory with his dad, and they did it through flashbacks, and they're doing the same thing with this episode. But here, as we get through this, we're getting his training, which he never really got from his dad. Mm-hmm. So it's, I don't want to call it a filler episode, because I mean, I didn't enjoy the episode, I think, more than you did, mm-hmm. but it's definitely, let's flesh out our character.
We can dive into it a little bit more as we get into it, but I think my initial feeling is that it did kind of feel weird that we're getting this detour right off the back of last week's episode, which I, talked about how much I loved last time. So I think I think maybe there's some expectations on my part that weren't filled, and that's could be factoring into my disappointment a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we go with what you've been saying, that A-B cadence, and if that last episode was the B of it, and we have that closure between, of those 2 episode little arcs, I could see why they were able to pivot into this flashback type of episode.
Now, I did want to bring this up. We talked a little bit this before we jumped into the recording, and it's something that neither of us could confirm. So if you're on social media and would like to clear this up, I've talked about how I don't have extensive comic knowledge of these Marvel characters, but I do know that there is a faction called the Hand that Daredevil frequently goes up against. I want to know, was it a reference to have this man lose his hand to that notion?
I don't think so. Wait. Who lost his hand?
The Japanese man that stick.
The Japanese man. Okay, because in my head, I'm just picturing him being dead with the blood, with the blood splatter. So yeah. I don't know if it was a reference to the hand. Honestly, thinking it through, it probably is. Actually,
because he made a specific point about losing your appendages, and then I don't know, it was interesting the way they focused in on that hand. It felt like it was a call up.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, actually.
Yeah, I thought that was a little interesting tidbit.
Yeah.
So that leads into the title sequence, which afterwards we are joined with Foggy, Karen, and Matt back at their offices, and Foggy is lamenting the deeds of Daredevil and calling him a coward and talking about how he's doing all these terrible things, and it leads to a discussion among the 3 of them about the judge of Daredevil's character.
Yeah, I like that Matt tried to stay out of it. I mean, you had Karen defending Foggy, taking down the character of Daredevil. But like when Karen asked, he made this joke about, yes, Foggy will pitch for the Mets, because the Mets are bad, or something along those lines. And he always tried to distract it from Daredevil and go to the action.
If we kind of go back to that idea, with that discussion that Matt and Father Latham had about how unfair it is to have to bear the burden of knowledge but not be able to say anything, it's got to be so hard for Matt to have to stomach this conversation.
Oh yeah,
to have his best friend just tearing him down and the work that he's been doing without even realizing it.
Right, especially from Foggy.
Yeah, right. Because that's who else does he trust more in the world than Foggy? We've seen examples of superheroes juggling this balance between personal life and vigilante life, but coming off last episode, where he's already doubting his convictions, I don't know. I felt the weight of this more than I have in other variations we've seen of this scenario.
He gives a very stereotypical lawyer-esque answer when when Foggy asks, "Are you mad about this guy in the mask doing these things?" And Matt says, "Yeah, I'm mad that you got hurt, Miss Cardenas got hurt, and all these people got hurt." He didn't say, "I'm mad that the guy in the black mask did this," right? And he even said, yes, it's his right to a defense, and we would defend him to see the truth come out. And to me, you could just see it on his face as well, of almost this cringe on his face and having to defend himself. And in particular, he's starting to see the beginnings of what Kingpin said would happen, or what he would make happen, as far as the city turning on him.
Oh yeah, and we see that ripple effect continuously through this episode. Peeking ahead a little bit, Ben and Karen have a conversation about the Man in the Black Mask character as well. So it's that ripple effect is still felt from last week.
Right.
And then the fact that he's doing all this while we don't learn this until the scene ends, he's doing all this while still investigating the information about Leland.
Yeah.
I do want to say, we talked about in, I believe, episode 2, where you mentioned something like, who is Foggy to judge the character of the city when he doesn't know what his best friend's doing at night? It's so funny that they have this conversation about hey, do you feel like Karen has secrets to Matt?
Yeah.
And that irony was it was very delectable.
Yeah. Well, in his Acer, we all have secrets. Well, I don't.
I'd like some.
Next, we see in a parking garage, there's Leland confronting Nobu about money in their business deal.
So the thing I think I like about this scene is how it's kind of showing the slow burn of infighting within the Union Allied group. I don't remember exactly how all of this is going to play out, but the last time we saw them all together, Fisk makes this big sentiment about how a rising tide raises all ships.
Mm-hmm.
And here we get Leland, who is clearly afraid and is trying to kind of like make sure he's protected by joining up with Nobu. And even Nobu's response is in direct contrast to what Fisk said. He says something like, every man needs to be able to stand for themselves or they'll fall to the unworthy. And it's just, it's interesting to me that we're starting to see cracks form within that group.
I think I love the most about this scene is just how much Leland is unimpressed with being all secretive. He's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he's so, like, it's all about business, and he's just so unimpressed with all of this.
It's really funny you say that, because my other note is Leland reminds me of Droopy Dog, and I don't know why. Just matter of fact and doesn't care. It's just moving along.
Well, I mean, it's funny because he does it well, I guess, because he has that. And as you mentioned, he does realize, I got to also take care of myself. He reached out to Nobu. I think rightfully so, because seeing where things are going and what happened with the Russians,
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's very clearly, because he said what happened to the Russians could happen to us. I think that's the quote.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, it's interesting to see that fear kind of breaking through to them.
Now, at this point, Nobu leaves and Daredevil shows up.
I think this is the maybe third or fourth interrogation we've seen Daredevil do. And it's always so funny to me how the people that are being interrogated think they can lie and get away with it. Of course they don't know that he has that ability.
Right.
But it's so funny that he always has to it's almost like a parent speaking to a child, okay, now think about your answer and tell me the truth.
What I find interesting is we've seen Daredevil do pretty amazing things. And I even wrote it down. That seemed very easy for Leland to take him down. Mm-hmm. Now, I get that he got distracted. You had the cane walking up, and essentially we find out that person that distracted him was Stick. But, I don't know. He seemed not on his A game that night.
Right. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wrote here in my notes, I have a question for you. Do you think Matt got caught off guard because he let his guard down enough to be scared by the noise? Or is Matt caught off guard because he recognizes Stick's tapping pattern and hasn't seen him in so long? That was the only way I could reconcile him being taken down so easily, is that he immediately has this sense he knows who it is, and it's been
I want to
so
say
long
it's
since
the
they've
former.
seen each other.
Because otherwise it doesn't make sense, I mean, I guess you could say he was caught off guard because he wasn't expecting anybody else. I just feel like for where the story in this episode goes, it makes more sense to say he realized who it was right away.
So after Leland gets away and leaves Matt tased on the floor, we do get a flashback with younger Matt, who is still dealing with the newfound sensory overload that he has. And we get introduced to this character by the name of Stick, who takes Matt under his wing, and they have a very blunt conversation about how Matt can move forward with what Stick perceives as gifts that he's been given.
Right. What I found interesting, you asked, and I forgot which episode, about his abilities. This seems to imply that they were enhanced by the chemicals. Mm-hmm. Did you get that?
I would say so, because I think Stick has a line where he says, they think you're getting worse, you're getting stronger.
Right.
And he flicks his keys at him, and the way Matt's hand kind of quickly reaches up, it felt not supernatural, but it felt enhanced.
It did. And what's interesting is, I think in the original Daredevil comes out, it was enhanced. Whereas in the Frank Miller Man Without Fear miniseries, It wasn't enhanced. It was something taught.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to me where they're taking basically both of those origins and kind of piecing them together here.
Yeah. It's a nice fusion of the two, philosophies.
Right.
I mentioned off podcast, and I think I've mentioned a little bit already that how I wasn't overly fond of this episode. A lot of what didn't work for me, I think, is Stick as the character, who is a lot of the attention. We get this back and forth scene where they're on a bench discussing, how Matt should be fortunate that, he didn't die and he needs to be this realist. I like the idea that in the absence of Matt having a caring father figure, he ends up with this hard-boiled cynic who is willing to take him under his wing if he hardens up and becomes a realist. We saw the way Jack was supportive and encouraging, and now that it's gone, it feels natural that Matt would want to harden up. I think the problem and why this episode doesn't work for me overall is there's no redeemable aspect to Stick, and that's where I start to have issues with him.
One of the things I liked about this scene here is seeing Stick, showing him the possibilities, describing the ice cream, the dog, the girl, the man on the bench, seeing those possibilities. Also, I think what kind of brought Matt in, or little Matt decided, this is who I'm going to follow and this is what I want. I think he saw his dad there. Hey, this is someone who wants me to be tough, who wants me to be a fighter. My dad was tough. My dad was a fighter. And so I think little Matt, hate to use didn't know any better, but I think that he latched on to that. That's, to me, what I got out of that interaction.
I like that you frame it like not that he didn't know any better, but that he latched on. I think that's where it starts to feel manipulative to me. We've already seen who Stick is as a person from the opening because he ruthlessly murders that person in the cold open.
Yes.
And so as they're trying to play out this okay, Stick's this very edgy person, but maybe deep down he is this person that does care about Matt, and that just kind of it conflicted for me, and that's why it didn't work.
Okay, I can see that. I can see why
I fully recognize that this is me nitpicking, but I wanna go ahead and say it. Especially the way that Stick speaks a lot. It's like hearing the words of an edgy teenager spoken through an older man. And that's I don't know. I didn't like a lot of his dialogue. But
that's so funny. Maybe that's why I'm used to it.
It just didn't feel natural to me.
Okay. So during this conversation, it started where Stick was telling him not to ask any questions. And I like how Matt, he has this keepsake. He keeps the wrapper from the ice cream, which was, they gave a close up of that. They really focused in on that. And so in that moment, it's something a little kid would do, to mark that moment. In the end, Stick did allow a question. Matt asked, what's your name? And that transitioned us in to the present, where Daredevil in the parking garage says Stick, where while we've been saying his name, we finally get his name revealed. And he gives the line, been gone 20 years. So we know that Matt was trained, but at least we get the sense that it didn't go well.
Yeah. After that, we do get a new scene where Karen and Ben are having a meeting in a car discussing all they can about the case and what they know so far. Karen is clearly frustrated, and Ben just kind of straight up tells her, hey, this is part of the job. We're going to run into a lot of dead ends. It's super frustrating, but, we still got to carry on. The main turning point for me in this scene is when Ben says that if she sees the man in the black mask, she should run the other way. And he reveals that, in his experience, he believes there are no heroes or villains, just people with different agendas.
And to me, a lot of this scene, that included, was trying to keep that gritty, real... I hate to associate gritty with realism, but that gritty feel. Because she even had that line, this is a long shot. I was a mean 3-point shooter, and I like the long shot. There's a very typical line for that moment. Mm-hmm. And he shot it down. For a show, it's a very typical line for that moment. And then he shot it down very quickly. This isn't a game, mm-hmm. To kind of, I guess, keep that gritty feel.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the notes I wrote down is that, it's no secret, I really enjoy Ben as a character, and Vondi Curtis Hall, who plays Ben, does such an amazing job of, like, telegraphing the weight of a life lived. Because in the scene where Karen starts questioning the shooting, Ben starts opening up about how he was standing right there when Blake got shot. And, for majority of it, like you said, he's kind of being steadfast, he's shooting it down and trying to keep things realistic. But in this brief window, we get to see him open up about how traumatizing this whole situation's been. And, he doesn't say it directly, but the way he delivers his line and relays information, it feels like this feeling of being tired of being this close to danger.
Right. I had an issue with that. So Blake's in a coma.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, and I guess I'll have to keep track. I don't remember if he wakes up. To be honest, why not? I mean, as creators, why not kill Blake?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless there's something I don't remember, he shows up again.
Mm-hmm.
Because even Ben has the line. Maybe that's some foreshadowing. If he wakes up, maybe he'll tell us something. I don't know. I just thought that here's a place you should kill him.
Yeah. Okay. What really does he have to offer? I mean, if he wakes up, he knows it's not the man in the black mask because he knows where he is and he knows in relation to where he got shot. But
there's an element of heroicism maybe for Ben because he was there, and maybe that's what they're trying to get across. But at this time, I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to be a darker, gritty show. Mm-hmm. Raise the stakes. Have that guy die.
I do want to say, one of my takeaways from this scene is that I don't know if maybe this is me having a bad read, but there was this like weird shot in the middle of it. At the end
I was just about to bring that up.
Yeah, where it's like the camera looks like it's leaning out from behind a dumpster in the middle of the scene, staring at the car that Ben and Karen are in. And then after they have their discussion, it feels like the camera kind of like leans back into hiding. And I think we're supposed to infer that they're being watched, but
yeah.
It felt so poorly telegraphed.
Well, okay, not only that, they had some audio cues.
Really?
Right?
I didn't catch those.
Well, like even in the audio, I think there was, it felt like somebody was moving around the way they did the audio. And then they cut back as he's driving off and you kind of feel like it goes with the car. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in this episode, at least in this episode, it never showed us who's watching.
Yeah.
And if nobody was watching, I don't understand the point. Yeah, what's the point of that shot?
Well, I said in my notes, I think we're supposed to infer that this leads to the confrontation that Karen gets into later, which we will get to. But I don't know. It was really out of place. And I think it's so jarring because, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first time we see the camera be a character. And that was what was weird.
Yeah, and the other thing, like you could have easily shown one of those guys that we'll talk about later. Unless it was something where it hit the editing room floor,
yeah.
But it just, yeah, it was very unsatisfying to be left with that it felt out of place.
Mm-hmm. And if they would have just left the one in the middle, I think I would have been okay because it didn't like ping in my brain until the last one. The last one is the one that really solidified like, okay, that's out of place.
Yes.
So after Ben and Karen's conversation in the car, we do arrive at Matt's apartment where Stick is immediately beginning to verbally tear it apart. Stick launches into this idea that Matt's grown soft by having luxuries in relationships, and Stick iterates that he really needs to cut ties with all the comforts that he has in order to prepare himself for what needs to be done.
Right. Is this the scene where, okay, we're about to transition out. So this is the scene where Matt throws a punch, right? And he gets his arm twisted.
Yes.
Okay, and what line he said something about his dad, right? And the reason why, as I can't remember what the line was, and the reason why I'm saying that is it.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay, what was it?
So he's provoking Matt, and he's like, at least when your father got hit, he got paid, unlike you, or something like that. Like it was something where he invoked his father taking money for falling.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, and the only reason why I'm bringing that up is my note reminds me of the training scene in Batman Begins on the ice, where Ra's al Ghul invoked his dad. It was like it was his fault, in part of that training.
Yeah, it's so funny how
I don't know why it just did.
Yeah, I find it so interesting how many parallels we've been drawing from the Nolan Batman universe in this Daredevil run.
It could be that they try to take a kind of a gritty, realistic look, or as realistic as possible, with these comic book characters. That's probably part of it. And most characters, male characters, have some kind of dad issue as well, and so it's probably easy between that. We talked about in the other podcast, the hero's journey and the story circle. It's probably because of all mixture of all those things, it's easy to find those, especially when they're so well done.
Mm-hmm.
When they're not well done,
mm-hmm.
It's a little bit harder to make those comparisons.
I'm trying my best not to just continuously nag on this episode, especially because I don't want the bulk of my criticism to come off how much I enjoyed the last episode. But I think there was a potential for this episode to be really effective from picking up where they left off. I talked a bunch about how Matt ends up leaving the last episode with this nagging question about whether or not Vladimir is right. So, having Stick here to reinforce Matt being at his lowest and needing to cut himself off from others is good on paper. But instead of giving us any choices for Matt to make about whether he believes Vladimir is right or resolving to stay true to his morals, we see Stick guide this episode instead. So instead of it being like this litmus test for, where Matt's at with his morals and no death code, it becomes a repeated attempt of the same, you have to kill to win, the only way to be effective is the, I don't think this is the scene where he says no half measures. It's basically crossing that line of...
No, we haven't. I think we get a flashback before we get to the half measure scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd have to disagree, because I think in a couple of scenes when they go work together, that's where he's put to this test.
Okay.
So like here in this scene, if it's the Matt is kind of sucked in by, you got to be tough, you got to be a fighter, see him as his dad. And then we know when we come back from the flashback, it's been 20 years, so it didn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
And here we get this, you become soft, look at all these things, you have this soft life, cut everything loose. I think Matt's kind of seeing through that toughness that Stick is trying to portray and says, no, this is not the life that I want.
Mm-hmm.
Or another way to put it is to say, the toughness that his dad had and the toughness that Stick had were not the same kind of toughness. And little Matt, I don't think could recognize that now, but grown-up Matt is recognizing that.
I do like that. That showing the differences in the, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Machismo is what's coming to mind, but I don't think that is exactly what I'm looking for, but like illustrating the difference between the character of Jack and the character of Stick.
No, machismo I think works, because you have that, what does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be tough?
Mm-hmm. Clearly
Jack's was, I'm a fighter, I'm going to love my son and do what's right for my family, or the best I can. We can question whether or not he was doing was right by throwing fights and all these other things. But you have that, put it up against a very warrior mentality, but a warrior mentality not in a good positive energy or a good positive direction, so to speak.
I do want to push back a little bit more, but I'll save it for when we get to where they work together.
Okay.
Because I think I can illustrate a little bit more where I have my issues about how it feels more Stick driven than Matt driven.
Okay.
But I do want to say,
the episode's called Stick, but okay.
I do want to say on your part that it was a nice catch all the way back in episode 2, where you pointed out that Matt knew the gunshot was his father's. because in this scene we get that flashback where young Matt's on the floor crying, and he's basically saying, it's my fault. It's my fault that he died. He was paid to lose and he won because I wanted him to. And so I think that clearly in text shows that Matt definitely had that weighing on his conscience in the beginning.
Yeah, I like that they were able to pull that thread, and you held on to that. You pulled that thread all the way through from him catching that gunshot in episode 2 to finally breaking down during that training session, and saying it was my fault. It also kind of mirrored that previous scene, right? We mentioned how he was provoked by what Stick said about his dad, and Matt threw the punch, and they kind of stopped him and put him in that arm lock, which transitioned us into that flashback, which was a nice transition right there.
Yeah, that's a good catch on the whole, because obviously I got the provoking and the present, but in a way he was provoking Matt, because Stick was incredibly cold about the way he was like, well, your father's not here now. There's only, he was just cold about the fact that he needed to move on from that. So I didn't pick up on that provocation too. Yeah,
well, I mean, little Matt said Murdoch's never quit. And Stick's response, then beat me. There's an element of weirdness as much. Now you're pulling me to your side. There's an element of weirdness because this is, an adult and a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, then beat me. And little Matt became very agile very quickly.
He did, yeah. It did stand out a little bit to me, but I didn't want to knock it too much because it was, he's a younger actor, but it was funny how he just kind of like really went into those kicks and twirls and everything.
Yeah. And I did like how that scene ended, where he said, maybe your old man fought for you, maybe did it for him. We'll never know. But it's time to stop taking a beating and giving one, which is really interesting because everything he got from his dad was, don't get up. No. Sorry, meta. I know everything he said he got from his dad was about getting back up, right? Which kind of enforced this taking a beating, right? And to kind of flip that on his head here in this training, I really liked that part of this scene.
And you talk about how the way they transition from present into past, and then it transitions back to the present where Matt has learned how to get out of that pin. I mentioned, and we're kind of having this debate about how they handled Stick, and I talked about how I didn't like that there was little to redeem him. If there was any moment where I said they serviced that a little bit, I think it would be right here. After Matt gets out of the pin, they start having this friendly-esque conversation where, Stick is like, hey, you got any beer? And Matt's like, yeah, it's in the fridge. And so it feels more genuine to me. And it's not like the manipulative one that we keep seeing on screen in these flashbacks.
Right. And I'm wondering, what's interesting is, Stick backs down after seeing that, like, okay, Matt's gotten a little bit better. And then he transitions to business, to try to get him to work together. And I loved that moment Matt realized Stick wanted his help.
Mm-hmm.
And Stick tried to stay away from it. His line was like, no, I'm trying to help you.
Which is, it's almost like the childish, like, I'm not touching you. Like he's just getting right up to the point of asking, but he just can't do it.
Right.
Oh man. Because I think in the scene where like they have that very gratuitous shot of Stick flicking the bottle cap off and it ricochets into the trash can.
Okay, I'm going to read from my notes. The bottle cap was a bit much.
Okay, I will read from mine. Because I'm very, like, we talked about it in the pilot. Like, as I've gotten older, like, I don't want to be critical in a way that's just like constantly negatively talking about something, but I feel like I'm doing that, but whatever, I'm going to lean into it. This is what my note says. I hate the bottle cap scene. I think the way Stick is written is not as cool as they think he is, and this bottle cap scene is the epitome of that. It's like a version of Hey Fellow Kids meme where Buscemi is holding a skateboard. I really don't like Stick.
That's okay. I don't think you're supposed to like Stick. I don't think you have to like Stick. I'm with you on the bottle cap. I'm definitely with you on the bottle cap.
I'm glad we got this common ground.
Well, I mean, I get, like, you have skills the way Daredevil does, you know. But my thought was, and I didn't jot this down, but my thought honestly was like, you realize for that distance and the number of bounces it took, how hard you would have had to flick that off with your thumb. It just didn't. Yeah.
So earlier I made the mistake of mentioning the half measures. And this is actually where we get that half measures line. Here's where I'm talking about being less effective version of last episode. Stick iterates that line about half measures, and that one day he's going to have to cross that line. We've already examined this, but it could have been so much more effective if we see a version of this where Matt's like, okay, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes. Maybe Vladimir got to him, and he's starting to have this resolve, like, maybe I do have to kill, because, we're going to have this reveal with Black Sky in later scenes. And it would have been, to me, more effective version of this episode if we see this Matt who's kind of fallen back on his morals a little bit, is willing to kill, and then he has to make that choice once he realizes what the Black Sky actually is. And instead of that being a choice Matt makes, it feels like Matt's just going along for the ride. I think that's where my issue is. And it's not...
Basically, you're saying it would have been a stronger point... for the whole series, if Matt was put to a more difficult test of that role.
Yes. Instead of feeling like it's just this thing he's going along with and it's Stick's choice, it would have been more effective having it his choice. Which I will say, and again, why I think I've been so self-conscious about this, is I don't think it's fair to any sort of medium to be like, well, I think it should have been this way instead, like critiquing a version that doesn't exist. But like that's the only thing that I can feel as I'm watching these scenes.
No, and that makes sense. I think it's fair to think of it in those terms. I mean, like, I always try to keep in the back of my mind, I'm doing the podcast about it and not creating it. Like, I'm not getting hired to write these things, but at the same time, as you watch and you're participating with the text, so to speak, what's making a good story, what's pulling you into the story. And if something's not hitting, especially when it's a part of the morality of this whole thing, I keep coming back to it, is what version of justice? Is it the lawyer justice or the Daredevil justice? And Matt struggling, which is the most effective way to do this? And we've pulled this no-kill thread all the way through. I can see where it's not as satisfying to not put him to as strong of a test as this episode did. And I do think that's fair.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel a little better.
I don't know how I would have done it differently. And mainly because, I mean, clearly, as we mentioned earlier, you're using this episode to fill out backstory, to get Stick in there to explain how Matt was trained. I mean, I guess you'd have to rewrite this whole episode and maybe the Black Sky stuff out. And to be honest, I don't think Black Sky actually ever gets paid off in this season.
I was wondering about that. Because I clearly don't remember how this all plays out, but I was questioning whether or not that would be something we get to continue on in this season.
To make a MCU reference, it feels like the Thor scene when he goes off in Age of Ultron.
I think that's a very great way to look at it, because it almost feels like it's this weird detour in the middle of the season we've been watching. And yeah, I think that's a good comparison.
And they try to make some connection to it, right? Like, he talked Matt into helping him by saying, Fisk, if Fisk knows you beat Black Sky, then Fisk will be scared of you. And so and that was kind of the selling point that talked Matt into going. I don't think, which is interesting because it's not dawning on me till now. And think back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, of how Fisk talks about all, tide rises all boats, Nobu's, no, we all stand alone. It didn't dawn on me watching it, but Fist has no idea what Black Sky is. There's no way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it took me thinking it through to know that there's no way Matt, I mean, the number of times they said they've thrown in our face, because Matt just now got the name of Nobu. Stick knows Fist's name, and he's, how do you know Fist's name? And he's like, oh, there's so much you don't know. I mean, they keep throwing it in our face how little Matt knows.
Mm-hmm. I wish we would have been keeping a counter on that. That would have been fun to keep track of. It's kind of like that cut of Star Wars where it's like Qui-Gon Jinn is the worst Jedi, and it's just a super cut of like him falling.
Oh my god, that's funny.
It would be a super cut of everyone just telling Matt, "You don't know what you're talking about."
Side note: there's on Disney Plus. You got to go watch. There's a show you got to watch. I'll tell you about it off podcast. But it's Dave Filoni who basically is the Star Wars guy for like Clone Wars and all these other shows that added a level of depth to Qui-Gon and the Phantom Menace that I didn't realize existed. Like I'm going to go back and rewatch this.
Cool. I'll have to check it out.
Back to our MCU, but
corral it all into the MCU. They've been doing a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff on Disney Plus or Star Wars. Give me that for the Marvel side, please. I want that.
Yes, please. Please, please, please.
I'm sure once Falcon and the Winter Soldier happens, we will, but man, I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so.
All right, back to the episode.
Okay.
After Matt agrees to carry on with their plan, we get a new scene where Karen arrives at Mrs. Cardena's apartment with groceries. They have a conversation where Karen's trying to get information to draw some connections between the connection company and the repairmen. And after she's done with that, as she's leaving the apartment, she runs into a confrontation with two shady men.
Okay, I'm going to start here just reading right from my notes, and I want to see what you say. Okay? Okay. You have to be kidding me. I get that someone can be interested and the other not know, but I don't buy it the way they shot this.
So I'm assuming you're talking about the exchange where Mrs. Cardenas refers to the attractive lawyer and Karen goes, Matt?
Yeah. Well, not only that, but like that Karen, honestly, the way it's played out, didn't know Foggy was interested in like trying to date her through all this, and she has that moment, and they kind of play it off where she says, "Oh, Jesus Christ," and then you get Miss Cardenas' reaction, but it's just, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's you talked about how like it's so frustrating that it shouldn't work, but it works because the actors work really well together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's this constant butting of heads where the actors are working really well together, and then it feels like the writers can't make up their mind about how they want to handle this.
Right.
And it's just so awkward and clumsy, and it's something I didn't pick up on my first watch through, but now as we've had these discussions about how looking back through it with new lenses and how things may not have aged well, it's so, I don't know, it bums me out. I think they're my least favorite scenes now.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I don't dislike the characters. It's just the way they have them interact together, those two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, okay, I have another question for you. And this is for the end of the scene.
Yeah.
Does Foggy have a no-kill code?
It's so funny that you brought that up, because in my note, I'm going to read it straight here. Remember how I said it takes a lot to get to the point where you smack someone in the face with a baseball bat? I guess that doesn't apply to Foggy. And I mean, it's just like, there's so many problems here, because you mentioned how they've taken a very gritty and grounded approach to the darker sides of this show. Mm-hmm. And, this is a heavy scene. Karen gets attacked. She's cornered and alone. And then comes in Foggy. And then it becomes comical. They have that exchange where they're like, what are you doing? Why were you following me? He's like, I don't know. I was following you because I was worried. And it's like, okay, well then let's leave. Like it. Yeah. I don't know. It felt slapstick. I don't think that's
it. I'm okay with him showing up.
Yeah.
And the following, I get that. There's elements of where I don't think it worked either. because you don't get the sense of he had the intent of following her. Because if you go back, and it's been a while, I guess, from that scene, Karen leaves, and one of them, Matt or whatever, asks about the mace, and then Matt is, I'm going to stay in and work some more, and Foggy asks, do you want me to stay? And Matt says no. So then Foggy leaves. So it wasn't like he was rushing out to follow her either. So to pair them up here just seemed like it didn't follow. Or are they expecting us to forget about how that interaction went?
You know what? Now that you frame that, I'm really starting to wonder if you're right about something on the cutting room floor. What if the awkward camera scene was supposed to be Foggy? Maybe. And maybe there's some scenes that we're missing here that would have clarified that a little bit and made more sense of why Foggy was
and
there.
that would have, it would have made sense of why she's followed. Why are you going to the dock? Why are this? But that would make Foggy way too creepy and a less likable character.
Yes. Maybe that's why it got cut.
And again, this is speculation on our part, but if we're right, I'm glad they cut it.
Yeah. If we're right, tag us. If anybody that's worked on the show is listening,
tag us.
Let us know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because it already was creepy enough to find out that Foggy was following her. I mean, it worked out because she needed help, but it's just...
And what a throw.
It's very uncomfortable.
He had to throw that unbelievably hard and accurate to hit that guy in the head and knock him down. Like where he's not getting back up immediately.
Yeah. Maybe there's an entire whole side story where Foggy's a superhero and we just haven't seen his show yet.
I would love to see it. Bring that guy. We said this a number of times. I don't want Charlie Cox recast, and I don't think you can recast Foggy Nelson because it'd be weird. It'd be too weird.
That'd be a package deal. Although we've already seen friendships get, recasted because we had Rhodey and Tony. So it's not like they haven't done it before.
Yeah, but that was money issues. I don't know with these side characters if you're going to have the money issues.
I doubt it. I do want to say this. Going back to the scene with Karen and Mrs. Cardenas, they had that exchange where I can't remember if it was the first time or the second time that Karen either curses or something, and Mrs. Cardenas says, "How long have you been like this?" And Karen responds, "Ever since I got to New York." I know we talked about how they've hinted at a dark past with Karen.
Yes.
I'm assuming, is this line kind of more of a reference to that? Because it felt weird to me, unless you could offer any insight to it. And if you're worried about spoilers, that's totally fine too.
I'm not worried about spoilers. Honestly, I find that line a little bit more fan service. Knowing how and when they reveal her backstory. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to tread lightly because I know you haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
I feel like the way they're treating Karen and her I feel like the way they're treating Karen and her backstory in this season, that is is more of a fan service line than like here we're going to acknowledge it that there's this backstory, again, but we're not. But they don't ever really flesh it out, I don't think.
Okay. All right. I guess it's one of those rewarding if you know the character, otherwise kind of sticks out a little bit.
And it also, maybe the curtains are blue and they're just trying to reinforce that this is a tough city.
Yeah. So after that entire exchange between Karen Cardenas, Karen and the intruders and Foggy, we do arrive at the docks where Nobu and his men are seeing the arrival of a large shipment. This is where Stick and Matt gather together to carry out their plan and destroy Black Sky.
Right. So I'm going to actually come back to you. You said here you were going to kind of push back and reinforce your thought.
So it's kind of playing off. We got into it a little bit where I talked about how it would have been more effective to see okay, Matt's here at his lowest point. He resolves to okay, maybe I have to kill. And then we get to this point. I don't think we've talked about it yet. We get to this point where Black Sky is revealed to be a child. And clearly that's a very hard line that Matt obviously was never going to cross. I don't think there's ever a point where we believe Matt could have killed this kid.
Right.
But if we would have been following, like I said, this ideal version of the episode where Matt has been swayed into this idea of, compromising on his morals, I think having this moment would have been more effective, because instead the whole crux of the scene is we're seeing Stick work with this equipment, and the big reveal is that he has constructed this bow and arrow that he uses to aim at the kid. And it's a cool scene because Matt does the deflection and keeps the kid from being killed. It didn't work for me as much as it would have been if it was Matt's choice.
So I think what they were trying to do was, in my note here, Matt risks himself to save the kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So his job, he goes to thin the herd, as Stick says. And he's effectively doing that. And while doing that, nobody's noticed them there yet. And they give us the visual and audio cue that Matt realizes it's a kid. They get the I think just an audio cue where he hears the bow and arrow, and nobody realizes they're there yet. So like to deflect the arrow and make it miss, puts himself at risk
mm-hmm.
in order to save this kid. And I think that is their way of showing his commitment to this no-kill code.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because, and I don't think we necessarily mentioned this, but while he did get talked into it, he also made Stick promise to not kill anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Which that alone, I had my own side things, because part of me is like, well, Matt, you're a human lie detector. How'd you know he wasn't lying?
Right.
But if Stick, I was going to say, if Stick doesn't see this kid as a kid and sees him as a weapon, he's not lying to say, I'm not going to kill any person.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I was gonna push back on this a little bit, and this might be just me saying the same thing, but I think what I ultimately come down here is that we know who Stick is a person. So having this moment about him going to kill the kid, his character's not on trial here. So I guess that's why it was least interesting to me. But you framing it with this idea that Matt makes the choice here about deflecting the arrow alerts everybody to the fact that they're there. That actually sways me a little bit back more onto your side. I didn't read it that way, but once you kind of like walk me through it, I can see that being the choice that gets made here. Right.
Well, what's interesting is we've had two scenes where we kind of criticized of like, why are you holding our hand through this?
Mm-hmm.
The pinball scene with Wesley, which, I still love that they had it with the I Got Next.
Mm-hmm.
And Wesley and Turk, when Wesley, like, we already knew that. Why are you explaining this to us?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting is here that I don't know, while I got that read out of that scene, I don't know how explicit it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Matt or, Daredevil did right here.
Yeah.
In that way, I'd have to agree with you that there could have been a more impactful way or a larger test that they could have put him to stay committed to that no death, no killing code.
Yeah, it's funny, like you said, to compare about how we criticized it in here. They didn't do that great of a job of leading us. There's this small happy medium, I guess, they got to thread.
Mm-hmm.
So after everything goes down at the docks where Matt and Stick have been spotted, in the middle of everything, we get a flashback where young Matt and Stick are training. We've clearly seen how much young Matt has progressed, and there's a real connection that's being made, and Matt unfortunately makes the mistake of getting really sentimental, to which Stick responds by telling him they're training.
So yes, here's a moment where little Matt kind of fulfills that attachment he had that kind of drew him in, right? Where he's seeing him as his father figure, because he gives him, I mentioned, like, it's a keepsake, the wrapper from the ice cream from that first time seeing him, like a little kid. I'm going to hold on this kind of to mark the occasion, or he turns it into a bracelet. And then Stick immediately, which I found interesting because to me, Stick immediately crushes it in his hand, and they're both blind. So Matt couldn't see him do it, but you still had the sense of the emotional force, I think, in that action.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because for all my issues that I've had, this scene, I mean, is just incredibly heartbreaking. Like that, especially from the kid, just that silent heartbreak where he's just standing there unable to process what had happened. Like it's amazing the amount of emotional narrative that they're able to derive from this ice cream wrapper.
Right. And, little Matt has no idea, and at least at this point, it's Stick. He even says the line, "I expected too much of you." So he has this attachment to Stick. And so Stick decides to cut it off.
Yeah. I mean, basically mirroring everything he said about how Matt has needed to cut loose all his ties to, the people he cares about. And, after that flashback, we transition back to the present where we're at Matt's apartment and Stick's already waiting. You talked about these father issues. Stick clearly states it when he says, "You wanted a father, I wanted a warrior." And Matt says, "I guess we're both disappointed."
Right. Well, and it's an interesting conversation here because you mentioned how cordial the conversation got. I share a beer and they're kind of chatting back and forth. Matt, "You lied." It's like, everybody lies, or just some effect of that, that led to that, this disappointment, in each other. And I think here's where Matt finds out that Stick killed Black Sky.
And that's what ultimately leads to their confrontation, because Matt says something to the effect of like, "I'm not going to let you get away with this," or "I'm not going to let you leave," or something like that. And Stick responds like, "Oh, I already killed Black Sky. I caught up with him and ended him." And then they immediately start getting into their, I guess, second fight in this episode.
Second in the apartment.
Yeah.
Second in the apartment. Fourth, if you want to count the training.
Yeah. This might be nothing, but I will say as the fight progressed and everything's being torn down, it almost felt like it was mirroring that training room they had. There was something about the two rooms that felt very familiar to each other.
Right. Well, and I liked how the fights in the apartment, well, like you said, mirrored the training, but in that they all progressed, right? You get a little bit of training. We show Matt's kind of gone beyond the training. He can get out of that hold. You see some more training where little Matt is kind of on par with Stick. And then you get to here where it is not, two equals in terms of relationship fighting. It is, we're seriously at odds and now fighting, and it gets ramped up.
Yeah, because Matt has that devastating flip where he just lands on Stick's back off the stairs landing.
Off the stairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
was brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because Stick even replies like, "Well, hey, maybe there's hope for you yet." Right,
which is still interesting to see that myopic look of Stick, of you need to be a killer, or for in his words, that's like a warrior, but you need to not take those half measures.
And we do get a scene in between this, but I'll just go ahead and jump ahead and combine these two discussions since they really play into each other. Eventually we get to this point where Matt's picking up in his apartment after Stick has left, and he discovers that after all these years, Stick has kept on to that ice cream wrapper. I really do like this idea of Matt confronting his problematic past and still yearning for that father figure via Stick. Like we said, with the cordial relationship, I wish we would have gotten a little bit more of that, and that would have made this more impactful for me.
Well, I like that he still kept it in that, well, I mentioned, like, there's this assumption that Matt got attached, so Stick left. But the fact that he kept the wrapper, we realize that, no, Stick is the one that got attached and left, yes, yeah. Little Matt got attached, but Stick, out of his own fear of attachment to little Matt, decided, I have to leave because he's not staying true to what he's preaching in that detachment. And I liked how very slowly the piano playing in the background was the Daredevil theme from the opening credits.
Yeah.
It just gave me the sense of like, it was slow. And so it gave you kind of the sense that, it was a somber moment as Matt has this realization, But also it kind of gave me the feeling of like Daredevil 1.
Yeah. It's like, I think somber is a great way to put it, because just the slow leaning up against the couch from with Daredevil. I mean, Charlie Cox just does a really good job of hammering home the emotional effect of this scene. So I did mention there was a scene in between these two moments, so we can jump back to that just real quick. Karen and Foggy arrive at Ben's office. Ben is upset that Karen has enlisted the help of Foggy, but Karen vouches for his trustworthiness, and they begin detailing all that they know about the Union Allied case to Foggy.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Karen mentioned he's a kick-ass attorney, and my thought was, shouldn't the newspaper have its own attorneys?
That's, because we talked a little bit about that, but you just kind of triggered something in my head too. A kick-ass attorney that she didn't even consult whenever she went up to Union Allied to get the non-disclosure agreement.
I know, right? Like it's so awesome that I'm not going to consult you when I need to do legal things.
Oh man, it really is like they don't know what to do with them anymore.
You know what? And I hate that, because the Foggy Nelson character I love, and I do think there's a lot of good scenes for him that we've had and that are coming, that he shows up in the other seasons and whatnot. So, but yeah, it was just kind of, weird. And then the other thing I found weird about this scene is Ben said, "I told you not to tell anybody else," but he actually also told her, "We're not going to meet again at the office."
Yeah, that's a good catch.
And they showed up at the office.
I didn't mention it, but when Karen was with Mrs. Cardenas, my first note was Karen's really bad at keeping secrets, because I think she even involves Mrs. Cardenas in what she's trying to do, and now she's involved Foggy, and she's shown up at Ben's office. Right. Yeah, I can't imagine. It's understandable how frustrated Ben is in this scene.
Well, and we know you can trust Foggy, but Ben doesn't necessarily know that. We also know Ben is worried about himself and Karen getting hurt, but also he has a genuine care of like, I don't want people to get hurt, good people to get hurt for my story. And so I can see why you got to keep that number limited.
Yeah.
Now in this scene, I did find a mistake. So when he pinned the jack, the card representing Daredevil, and he had the jack with the blindfold on, I don't know if this part was a mistake. There was already 2 holes punched in the card, and that, I'm not sure if that was a mistake when he punched it on there, but he punched it in with a silver thumbtack, and they cut away, and he has some line about which one trumps the other or something, or they weren't quite clear on if the man in the mask was working for Fisk or not. But when they cut back to that close-up, the thumbtack was a red thumbtack instead of a silver one.
That's another good catch. We talked about it a little bit last episode, where I said I wish I knew more about cards so that I could understand TV and film. I came into this knowing I was going to ask you. They have that line where it's like, so clearly Man in Black Mask and Fisk are against each other, but which one trumps the other? And then he pins the card next to it. I don't know enough about cards, but doesn't Jack always trump King? I mean, King always trump Jack?
Yes, King always trumps Jack.
So
well, what? And they could have actually made it like put 2 kings up there in different suits, and then you could have got into this, is one suit higher than the other? But no, yeah, it's King beats Jack.
And it's so funny because we praised last episode about how it's such a great visual metaphor to without even having to say a word, detail everything he knows. And then the moment where he actually starts to have using words, it all starts falling apart and they lose their visual metaphor. They should have just left it silent.
Yeah.
But yeah. That's going to be whenever we do in between Daredevil seasons, I just need to commit to learning cards.
Okay. It's on. We're going to learn cards.
Awesome. Oh, actually, I just thought of this point. I didn't write this down, but you kind of brought it up for me. You talked about how like it's a shame that we're kind of getting these, maybe meandering is the right word, plot lines with Foggy, and how you know how he gets utilized in future seasons, and you really like it. I think in an episode or two ago, I made mention that I liked that we were getting this case with Mrs. Cardenas because it really centered on Foggy taking front and center, and they were giving him something to do. I find it interesting that we get to this point where it feels meandering, where Foggy has been replaced with the Mrs. Cardenas plotline, and now it's Karen that's in that role. I wonder if that kind of plays into why things feel disjointed, as they kind of like cross their narrative lines here.
Yeah, it's just that's some weird, maybe interesting choices. That they've done with those two characters.
So for the last scene of the episode, we get this very ominous shot where Stick is detailing the success of his mission to a mysterious figure, and the figure begins to question about the status of Matt and whether he'll be ready when the doors open. Stick responds by saying he has no idea.
Yeah. I remember when that first came out, everybody said that was a reference to a character named Stone. In the comic, Stone was a pupil of Stick. And they were both part of this organization called the Chaste. I don't remember if he shows up again or is paid off in any kind of way. Well, yeah, I don't remember fully. I have an idea. But, it is a clear reference to the Hand and something bigger.
Yeah. Because I think I even texted you. I forgot that Stick brought so much of this supernatural element to the show.
Yeah.
And so that felt a little, I mean, I think you summed it up perfectly. Like, calling up to the MCU proper is the way Thor's side plot in Age of Ultron was just kind of, feels like an odd detour that they take right here in the middle of the season of Daredevil.
Right. Well, and I can tell you it is setting up other things down the line. If you want to take, say, Netflix itself as a universe, it is laying the seeds for other things.
Yeah.
So,
I agree that it definitely has that feeling of setting up for more to come, but it almost feels as though instead of in Avengers having that Thanos in tag at the end after the credits, if you just had it randomly in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, I can see that. Because if it was at the end, you have that teaser looking forward to what's to come. And here, here you do. It's almost like that teaser of what's to come. And I don't think it gets paid off.
Yeah.
Or at least, in this season, where at mid-season, something like that, you'd expect to get paid off.
Again, I've only seen season 1 and 4 episodes of season 2. And so I guess I'm trying to preemptively track like how these storylines could play off in 1.5 seasons, but I forget, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but I think there's 2 seasons of the Defenders, right? Where Matt, I'm sure.
No, there's only 1 season of
Defenders. There's only 1 season of Defenders. Okay, well then there's still there's still that season for it to be explored as well. I don't know if that's the case, but I need to stop judging it from the that limited space that they have story wise.
No, and I get that.
But that is it for season 1, episode 7. Do you have any overall final thoughts?
I'm just gonna say this is a good episode, and you should like it. No,
to that point,
no,
I do like that this is the first time I think we've disagreed with an episode.
Yeah, it is. I think it is. Man, yeah, I think it is. No, I do like this episode. I liked the explanation of Matt's abilities, and giving and fleshing out that background, because we never really got how he was able to do the things he does. So I very much like that. I see your points on lacking that true test to a rule that we finally established for this character.
I think for me, my overall thoughts about this episode, we spoke so highly about how, for the most part, episode 1 through 4 were very economical and great at doing what they were doing story-wise. And it really feels like here in this middle section of the season, we're hitting some rocky roads. And it ultimately kind of makes this episode feel a little like padding. And we've had this discussion before, but I wonder if we're doing this show almost a disservice by watching it on a week-to-week basis, because we talked about that AB cadence, and I look forward to tracking how well the Disney Plus shows handle this when it's not relying on dropping all at once.
Right. I do feel like this does have an AB cadence, though. Like, I watched ahead just a little bit, so I do feel like it has kind of an AB cadence here with the next episode.
I don't know. I'll keep my hopes up. I'll try not to be so overly negative on this one until we see B.
Did you not watch ahead at all?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm watching it week to week.
All right. Well, sometimes you watch, sometimes you jump in, so that's...
Well, it's only if I can't find my remote and the intro starts playing.
Okay.
But yeah, you're familiar. We're 7 episodes into this podcast now. We do have our question of the week. So without further ado, here's this week. Jude, which reveal or twist in the MCU had the biggest impact on you?
I'm assuming, I was about to say this, let me just say this. Spoilers for anybody who have not seen these movies. Okay. I think we've made in other episodes some clarifications that we assume you've seen these movies up to a point.
I would imagine the type of person looking for MCU podcasts is caught up to date. Once we start getting to territory where new stuff has arrived, we'll definitely have to keep hammering home.
Then yeah. I'm going to say the reveal of the Vulture.
Oh.
Being the father. That one's my number one.
That is a really good one. I'm actually ashamed I kind of forgot about that.
Because that was one I did not see coming. And it was just like, and really caught me off guard.
Yeah. Like I remember being in the seat and like my heart just dropping.
Yeah.
At that point.
Well, because you're on a prom date and he's trying to be a normal kid. And I just felt so bad for him of like, you couldn't have that normalcy.
And that's Peter Parker in a nutshell.
It is.
It's like everything that we love about Spider-Man is that, how is the way, I think the people that developed the PS4 Spider-Man game put it perfectly, where they said Peter Parker is constantly juggling as many plates as he can and trying not to let them fall. And that scene felt like that, because like he was finally kind of breaking away from the superhero life, and it all just came crashing down outside of his control. Oh yeah, and the awkward moments of the photos there where he was just just had that look on his face. It was fantastic. Dang, I'm ashamed I forgot that. That kind of makes me want to reevaluate mine. But all right, so what is yours? Yeah, I'll just go with mine. So again, I know Captain America fanboy. Mine comes from Captain America Winter Soldier. And I want to preface it by saying, it wasn't until I think after Avengers and into Captain America Winter Soldier where I started like really getting to the point of like, okay, I'm 100% into this. So I didn't know who the Winter Soldier was going in. Like I had no comic book knowledge. I had seen Captain America, the first Avenger, but I hadn't seen it in close proximity to the sequel. Really? Okay. Yeah, I hadn't seen it in close proximity to the sequel, that I kind of completely forgot a lot of the details. So when it eventually gets to the point where it reveals the Winter Soldier is Bucky, that got me. Specifically because like I'm also the kind of person that like doesn't try and jump ahead to like piece together mysteries or something like that. I like just letting it unfold as it happens. Yeah. So that moment that it happened, I was like it was that effective for me. You know what? I find that interesting because Spider-Man Far From Home brought my kids to see it, and the reveal of Mysterio being the bad guy, which I knew was about to happen, right? And I was just curious of how they were going to do it from comics. From two things, from comics and basic movie vocabulary. But the shock on their face of like, oh, that is the bad guy, because they had no idea, or even talking to some of my students who were not familiar with the comics, but didn't know. Yeah, that's interesting. It's a similar thing with Winter Soldier, and it just never dawned on me till you mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, it feels special. Like it's like, how they're like, I actually know somebody that watched Thor Ragnarok having no idea that the Hulk was in it because they didn't see any trailers whatsoever. So when it got to that point, like that's a special moment for them that they very few people got to experience. And this kind of feels like my own version of that, which is cool. And then
we might have to have the trailer conversation.
That would be a fun episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because Age of Ultron, I think we could talk about at least for a podcast episode, their expectations versus what we got.
So do you have a second?
I just thought of one. And I can't even fully articulate why it was so impactful for me. I just remember it was in Infinity War. Whenever we get to the point where Thanos and Gamora arrive at the Soulstone location, and I'm embarrassed I can't think of the planet name.
Vormir.
Whenever they arrive on Vormir, and we have this big reveal that the Red Skull is this, guardian of the Soulstone.
Yeah.
It was just, I guess it was the first hint to what was to come with Endgame, the way Endgame wrapped up the entire 10 years. It felt like this is one of those first moments, like, okay, everything is coming together now when you're having Red Skull coming back into the conversation.
Yeah. No. And I remember that and kind of having that feeling, that, oh, wow, feeling and having the audience there with that moment. For me, the second one was when Vision picked up the hammer. Because I remember seeing that with my dad opening night, full theater, and everybody gasped.
Yes, same here.
So yeah, that would be my number 2.
And it's so funny. I will constantly cite that moment as one of, well, not anymore because of Endgame, but as one of the best movie going experiences I had, because the energy around me, the way that everybody was like that everybody was so caught off guard by it.
Yeah.
But it's funny that didn't come to mind whenever I thought about the big reveals having impact.
Part of me wanted to say the Captain America with the hammer. The thing about that one was, in a way, it felt like it should have happened, and I'm glad it happened. So it wasn't. It didn't have the same impact as when Vision did it.
Yeah, I don't want to undercut it, but I think we all knew it was coming. It was an expected thing, and it doesn't take away, because I think that might be one of my all-time favorite moments in the MCU. But it didn't feel like a reveal. It was like, yes, this just makes sense. No, yeah, finally,
we got what we wanted to see, right? And I think on our pilot episode or the bonus episode or episode 1, still naming conventions, like I saw that moment again, and it was like, oh, I still had that same feeling, But the Vision one truly came out of nowhere.
Yeah. It was so funny you were talking about referencing how, you still got all, excited and emotional and rewatching Endgame. I think I texted you this morning when it happened, and I framed it as, I don't know how else to describe it because this doesn't feel the right way, but I think I hit a new low. I was listening to a podcast where they just described that scene where, Cap and the hammer and then the portals where everybody shows up, and I started getting emotional. I was at work and I was weeding, and I was just like, oh, I'm so glad that I have my glasses on because I'm welling up with tears right now.
I don't think that's a low. I don't
know how else to describe it, but that's how much the MCU means to me. Oh man.
Yeah, no, definitely not a low.
Yeah. But of course, if you'd like to chime in with the question of the week, or if you'd like to chime in with the episode discussion of episode 7 of Daredevil, you can reach us at MCU Need to Know on Twitter or at MCU Need to Know on Instagram. Or if you'd like to write an email, mcuneedtoknow@gmail.com.
And if you would like, please take the time to give us a review and rate us on any platform that you're listening to. That really helps us out in terms of growing our audience. Thank you. And please share with a friend.
Yeah, seriously, to take the time to say thank you for everybody that's been listening. We've been monitoring the reception on the back end, and we're both excited with the way this has been received.
Oh, yeah. It's been very encouraging.
Yeah, so thank you. And special thanks to Nick Sandy for the use and rendition of our theme song. We are very happy with it. And yeah, until next time, thank you so much for doing this, Jude.
Thank you, Trey.
We'll see you all next week.
And then I noticed a mistake in their editing.
What?
So, when he goes to put the jack on the board, there's already two pinholes in the card. And he puts it up with a silver thumbtack, and then they cut back to them for that line, which trumps the other, and they cut back to the cards, and then it's a red thumbtack. So, I don't know if the two prior pinholes was a mistake, but clearly the thumbtacks
changes. Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is why. Okay. Did you hear?
I heard something. Why is the what?
Why is the door shut?
That's one way to find out. Oh man.
Like, she slowly backed out. Okay.
I mean, it's totally your call, but that already feels like an in tag with.
I'm gonna mark that. I'm gonna write that down real quick.
Oh man, why is the door closed?
So hopefully she was loud enough that comes across.